we're looking at the text here, which is really interesting and at the same time very difficult for us to apply in our life. We're not really sure how we can love our enemies and how we can deal with hostilities of those who are mean and cruel to us and insensitive to us. And in addition to that, we feel the sense of like injustice, not only because we got hurt, but because also, why do I have to forgive? Why doesn't God tell the offender and say, you go and apologize? And why shouldn't that be the greatest and the biggest message in the scripture? That you go and apologize. Why is it that you love your enemies? Why isn't it go love those whom you have offended? But so we feel injustice, we feel pain, and we feel a little bit more crushed by the fact that we're unable to forgive those who have hurt us in the past. But yet at the same time, it is precisely because God so loved the world and God loved us while we were still his enemies that we have this faith at all, that we have hope of salvation and we have hope of transformation. And I hope not as in like, I hope it will happen, like a wishful, whimsical thinking, but hope as in this is a sure thing that I am forgiven, even though I was anti-God. And I am loved by God. And I have been given all these spiritual inheritance that I may love my neighbor as myself. And I can even go beyond that and love my enemy. So that is what has been given to us, and it's easier said than done, that we don't know how to reconcile and love and serve the hostile world. So today I want you to know that yes, it is a sermon about reconciliation and forgiveness and loving your enemies and things like that, but one sermon is not going to do it. And this one sermon is not going to do it because your situation might vary dramatically or to some degree is different from what I am talking about. And every person's hurt, every person's conflict is different. And of course, I don't know, or even if I knew, I couldn't cover all those different scenarios. So I just want you to know that there's no one size fits all for this kind of issue. However, at the same time, I don't want you to toss out this sermon. I don't want you to toss out this story because it doesn't fit you perfectly. But I want you to look at it and hold whatever it is applicable for you, because I think there's at least one thing that is universal and that we should walk away with that. And I'll get into more of that a little bit later in the sermon. I had the privilege of meeting a general, a Korean general, while I was serving at LKPC. And he was probably the most influential general of his generation, of his time. And I had the privilege of meeting with him and sitting down and talking with him. And he was a really interesting man. And he wasn't what I thought he would be. He had a good sense of humor. And he was obviously a very intelligent man, although he was retired at the time. But I can see that he was still sharp as a tack. And I asked him, in our conversation, why can't we, as in globally, work together to disarm and collectively bargain so that we would have peace and we wouldn't have to invest so much into army and that money could be used somewhere else? Like, why can diplomacy be the answer? And I was really curious, like, not that I thought, in next decade, the world will experience peace. But I just wanted to know from the inside, someone in the inside, why that is not the strongest priority. And he basically said this. And he said, I don't know anything about that. diplomacy, world peace, collective bargaining, and coming together to work on disarming ourselves and others and coming into peace. He says, I don't know anything about that. But we know from history, ever since there was humanity, we have been at war. When when there's two people or more, there is conflict, there's strife, there's violence, and there has been war. And he says, because of that, I prepare. I prepare because that's just the fact. When we look at the answer that he gave, we realize that maybe violence is unavoidable, and we will get into some sort of violence or hostility in our time. Of course, I'm not talking about arming ourselves and things like that, but it's that you and I will get into conflict with someone at home, at church, workplace, at school, and the people that hurt us are often those are closest to us because they're in our proximity, they're nearby, and we spend a lot of time with them. And the greatest burden and greatest hurt and the greatest trauma often does come from those who are closest to us. And if that is the case, what are the options for us? What is option for you, knowing that you will hurt people and people will hurt you? Well, it seems like globally or at a sovereign nation, national stage, solution is, yes, there could be some sort of talk of diplomacy, but really the true answer is to arm yourself. And that's really the option one, that we arm ourselves. We're not interested in reconciliation. We're not looking for common grounds or looking deep inside to see what really took place. But really, you're going to hurt me, or someone's going to hurt me, and I'm going to put up the walls, and I'm going to have those spears, and I'm going to have some ammunitions, and I'm going to have witty things to say, and cruel things to say, just in case somebody crosses that line and climbs over the wall. And I am ready for you. I am ready. I have things that I can dish out if you dish something at me. So, or we can think about the biblical reality and say, what is the other option that I must do in the reality of what I've been experiencing and the reality of what I will probably experience? That you've been hurt and you will get hurt, and then you will also hurt other people. But you hurting others is something that I probably won't touch too much on, but it's about us loving our enemies. Okay, so when we do encounter an enemy and people are hostile, and I'm using that word enemy as someone who's hostile towards you and you get into a conflict, and what they do to you is excessive and unjustifiable and is uncalled for. Today's text, we see that Elisha is serving in the country of Israel, in the nation of Israel, and he's also serving the king. And as being a man of God, he has inside knowledge of what is happening in the enemy state, which in this case, Syria. Syria has been subdued somewhat under the reign of King David and Solomon, but after that, they prospered and things went downhill, and now they're rising up again and attacking Israel. And every time they try to attack Israel, Elisha would inform the king, do this, do that, and everything will be fine. So king of Syria thought there must be a mole, there must be a spy in the royal court. And he was looking for that spy. And his advisor said, it's not a spy. The issue is not a man or men in your court, but the issue is that Elijah and his God have information about us. And he knows everything that you're doing. He knows whether you're, what you're planning and what you're thinking and what you're going to execute. And that's the problem. King of Syria is no dummy, and it says, okay, if that is an issue, then all we gotta do is march in there and take out Elijah. So it's going to be a strategic targeting out of one single man in Israel. So as they come in chariots and horses and soldiers, armed, and to have just really having one purpose of taking out Elijah, Elijah comes and he prays, and basically they're blinded. But in this case, we see that Syria's reaction to Elijah is, to them is justifiable, but for Elijah, it is not justifiable. He is simply doing what any godly Israelite would do. And sometimes we get into a conflict and we don't understand why the person is hurting us. Why are you marching up against me? Why are you gathering your arsenal and being excessive with your words and the treatments towards me? And we don't understand. But when we experience that conflict and when we feel like we've been wronged, when we feel like we've been wronged, what happens is that our Christian upbringing or Christian morality kicks in. And we say, okay, I need to love my enemy, I need to forgive my brother or sister or my parents or my friend, and what do I do? And we just beat ourselves to death over and over again because we feel hurt, we feel like we need to forgive, but that's not easy. So we struggle and struggle and struggle. And the thing is, the more we struggle, the worse we feel, because we feel like, one, I've been hurt, and two, I'm no good because I'm having such a difficult time forgiving my enemy. So we get double-barreled, doubly blasted. And what we're looking for in that situation is probably two things. I'm sure there are many, but it's probably two things. One is you're looking for a sincere apology from the person that have hurt you. That's what you're looking for. So you want the person to come and say, oops, sorry, I did it again. And I want to apologize to you. And usually when people apologize, what do we say? For what? What are you sorry for? So we're not just looking for, I'm sorry, but we're looking for a good, sincere apology where the offender can name all the things that they have done wrong to you. So I'm sorry because I was insensitive to you. I said these words, and these words are not just hurtful words, and these are hurtful because it means this and this and this to you. And because of that, I've hurt you in this way. And that's what we're looking for, that we want a good apology of knowing exactly, and we know that they know what they have done wrong exactly. Second thing that we look for is, of course, is a good outcome. Now that you receive a good apology and it was sincere and they know exactly what they did wrong, you want the future to be a little bit brighter, or go back to the way things were in the past when things were good. So you're looking to restore your friendship, that that person is good to you, there's some sort of harmony. And more important than that, you want whatever behavior that they did to hurt you to stop. That is going to be the last one. The last one is going to be the last one. And I don't want it anymore. You apologize, let's move on, but I don't want you to do that anymore. That's it. But what happens when those two things don't get checked? Because in reality, it rarely happens that way. People don't come to us and they list and they give you a good sincere apology, listing all the things that they have done wrong to you. And in addition to that, they just stop doing whatever it is that they hurt you. In this story of Elisha, as I said, Syrian king marches up, and as the chariots, horses and chariots and soldiers march in to kill Elijah, Elijah blinds them. Elijah blinds them with his spiritual power and God, and he marches them into Israel's capital city. And in there, his servants, it's like, oh my gosh, like what are we gonna do? We have all these people chasing after us. And there, Elijah opens the servant's eyes. But before Elijah opens the servant's eyes, he says, we have more on our side than they have on their side. Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And that's what Elisha said to his servant. And he prayed to God, and he asked that his servant's eyes will be opened. And he now was able to see the true reality of the situation. And that, yes, there were Syrian chariots and horses, but as his eyes opened, he saw the chariots of fire that surrounded them, that came from heaven to give them protection and to be around them. And there, Elijah takes them into Samaria, and he after blinding them, he takes them to Samaria, and in Samaria, he opens their eyes and takes them to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel says this, should we kill them? And you can see the excitement, and you can see his resolution or his conviction that he wants to kill them, for he repeats it twice. And in the Bible, when you repeat it twice, it's a sure thing. Should we kill them? Should we kill them? It's a question, but it's really a statement. And Elijah says, no, would you kill your captives? And these people are your captives. Give them bread, give them water, and send them away. Because of that hospitality, that Syrians stopped raiding Israel for a short while. But eventually, they muster up their forces once again. And they lay siege in Samaria so that nothing can go in or out. The siege became so severe and so prolonged that Israelites were eating donkey's head, which was not kosher food. They would never, ever consider eating donkey's head. Yet donkey's head was fetching a high price. More so that even the gentlest of women and most loving parents have agreed to boil one another's baby so that they can consume as meat. So look, Elisha didn't get an apology from them. And two, the outcome, although temporarily good, ultimately it was not. So in reality, getting an apology and getting a good outcome just because you forgave, even if you forgave, is very unlikely. Yet the scripture calls us to love our enemy. What are we going to do when we know that our forgiveness and our own effort of reconciliation may not lead to a good outcome? What if the person doesn't apologize to me? Why should I forgive that person? To be honest with you, I have my thoughts on that. But rather than to educate you today and say, these are the reasons why you need to forgive, and this is why it is good for you to forgive. I just want to say to you that God sees your pain, and God sees your tears, and God sees the brokenness of your heart. And that He sees the great burden that you carry on your shoulders. And I want you to know that God is not looking at you saying, you're no good because you're a victim, and only way for you to get out of being a victim is that you forgive somebody and rise to be a victor. And because you didn't do that, you're more of a loser. You're more of a victim, and you're not very lovable. God is not saying that to you at all. He looks at you, and He is with you, and He wants to comfort you, and He has great compassion upon you. So I want you to have compassion for yourself as well. That know that whether, sometimes it's true that you had a great part in the conflict as well, and you really need to look at that it's a pattern in your life that you get into conflicts, and it's a similar conflict, or you get into conflict here, you get into conflict there, and it's just kind of an ongoing chain that you have in your life. And if that's the case for you, you really need to look at that. But some of us are truly just victims. Things happen. And we wonder, is it my fault? Did I cause it? Could I have prevented it? And there's just so many things that are running through your head. And then you feel like you need to forgive that person, even though you truly believe that you're a victim. I want you to know that just pause for a moment. Just pause on the thought of that you need to forgive somebody that have hurt you, and that you're just trying to figure out what you did wrong and why this happened to you. Just stop and pause and know that you need to have compassion upon yourself, because God has compassion upon you. He's not looking down on you because you're not ready to forgive. But I want you to think of a future where you are healed, and that you are able to forgive, and that you're able to move on, and that you can be whole again. Because when we withhold forgiveness and when we withhold reconciliation, and we are working on a scenario in our mind where we are saying, you're wrong, and you're wrong, and this is what you did wrong. The more we do that, and more we cut people out and write people out of our life, it is kind of like pulling out a blood vessel, one blood vessel at a time. Your body will still work, and things will go well, but eventually you'll feel the effects. That life, the blood which gives life to the body, is being slowly sapped away. When you have many cases, or when you have this great burden of not reconciling and forgiving, it is also kind of like deadening your nerves, and that you can't be sensitive to the touch and the pain. And you want those, it is painful now to struggle, even to think about a future where you are able to forgive someone. But that sensitivity is what is going to allow you to know God more. And that sensitivity is what will allow you to know that you are loved by God, that He loves you, and He greatly cares for you. So don't just burn bridges. Don't just pull out a blood vessel and deaden your senses. But for the time being, although it feels uncomfortable, I want you to feel the pain and surrender them to God. And just, you're going to have to trust me this morning that just do this knowing that God has great compassion upon you, that He loves you, and he does not write you off because you struggle with reconciliation and forgiveness. In Romans chapter 12, verse 19, it says, "Beloved." It doesn't say "you losers." It says, "Beloved." Paul is saying this to Romans. "Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God." That there is justice, that God sees your justice, and he's not just saying, you need to forgive. Go say to someone who have hurt you. They're saying, no, I see the injustice, and I have wrath in store for that. For it is written, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay," says the Lord. For his vengeance is exact. For his vengeance is not excessive. And for his vengeance is it's like medicine. Not only does it bring justice, but through his justice, he redeems a person that he pours his wrath upon. So let the vengeance be God's, not yours, and don't carry that with you. To the contrary, Paul says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Interesting image. But to have burning coal on your head would not be a good thing. And Paul says, do not be overcome by evil. In other words, don't have the burning heap of coal in your own heart and bring it to the other person and say, you feel my pain. But give it to that person so that they will transform. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And Paul is writing this letter when there was a great Roman persecution against Christians. This is the scripture, and here's what I want to say to you. I don't want you to try to forgive someone. And I know that sounds weird, but if you get logged off, you have to come back. You have to come right back into this worship. What I want to suggest to you today is not for you to struggle with loving your enemy. I don't want you to struggle with, I must feed my enemy. I don't want you to just feel bad that you don't know and you're not giving water to your enemy when he or she is thirsty. But what I want all of us to pray for is that God opens your eyes, that God will open your eye so that you may see the chariots of fire, that you realize that you're not alone, and you realize that you're protected and that you have something at your disposal that is greater than the pain that the world will give you. We will experience hostility and pain. But what we're asking God is, God, open my eyes that I may not be afraid to the pain that is coming to me, that I may overcome the world, not with evil, but with good. Let me give you a story, a couple of stories. And I know I shared the first story twice, at least. But I didn't connect these two stories for you before, and I'm going to connect these two stories for you. I had a friend in university, and I got to know him well, and he had a very colorful past. He belonged to a Korean mafia, and he did all kinds of violence. He did all kinds of silly, dumb things. And his parents sent him to Canada so that he can study and straighten himself out. So he was much older than I was when I met him. He came to Canada and he didn't know the alphabet. Like, he couldn't string A, B, and C to D. He knew there were letters, but he just didn't know how they strung together. And he came to Canada, he was learning, and he comes from a very strong Christian family, though. It's just that he was a black sheep, and something went wrong in his upbringing. I don't know. And he had a pastor. His uncle was a pastor. So his father's brother was a pastor, and his father was a 2-star general. And I won't give you too much information because I don't want you to Google him. And one day I got to know him, and we got kind of close, and he shared a story with me about his uncle. And as he was doing his ministry, a man came to him and said, "Pastor, I went bankrupt or something, and I need money." So he borrowed a fairly large sum of money from his uncle, who was a pastor. And upon the borrowing the money, he actually took off and he ran away. His intention was never to pay him back. He just needed money to restart his life somewhere else, and he just ran away. And my friend, let's call him Bob. Bob is back. He told his uncle, like, "How could he do that to you? You're a pastor. Do you want me to look for him and get your money back?" Because he has connections. And his uncle said, "No, forget it." How desperate must have he been for him to swindle a pastor, to borrow money from a pastor and to run away? He must have been desperate. And that's just what he needed to do. It's water under the bridge. It's okay. So he told me that story, and I said to myself, "Wow, I wish I can be like that. If I can be a pastor who's so forgiving and loving and able to reconcile with people and love my enemy." And then about a year later, Bob, who told me the story, took money from me, which was a fairly large sum of money, especially because I was a university student, and he ran away. And I remember the story that he told me about his uncle, who's a pastor. And I said to myself, can I be like his uncle? God, is this your joke on me that he told me that story and he does the same thing to me, and now I'm in a position where I have to forgive him? And I struggle with that. And being a quote unquote good Christian, I'm suppressing my emotions, right? Oh, I shouldn't hate him. I should pray for him. I should forgive him. But at the same time, when you're paying all that high interest, because I gave him money from my credit card every month, and you're doing your 3 jobs to make ends meet, to pay for your tuition and all that rent and everything else, it's really hard to say, oh, well, Jesus loves you and Jesus forgave me, so I forgive you. Until I had my eyes open and I saw the chariots of fire. I didn't really struggle for a long time because, of course, being a good Christian, I suppress all of these things and repress all my emotions. And I just kind of said, forget it. It's not a reconciliation or forgiveness, but just forget it. Who cares? I pay for it now. It took me quite a while to pay for all that, but forget it. But one day, like 4 or 5 years later, I met this grandma, and Nancy's back. We'll call her Nancy. And her husband left her with 2 kids. And it's one of those sad stories where her husband met another woman and abandoned his family. And they got divorced, and she had to raise these 2 kids by herself. But every once in a while, the husband would return, penniless, and ask for money. And she would give money to him. So every 5 years or decade or whatever, he would come back and ask for money, and she would give it. And of course, by the time I met her, she was in her 60s. And I said, Nancy, Grandma, Granny, what are you doing? You're poor. He left you. Why are you giving money? And I felt just angry for her, she seems to be cool with it, but I just don't know what's going on. I said, why are you giving her money? Why are you giving him money? And she said, because I'm Christian. And I thought, what? Because you're Christian. And I had to think, it's because you're Christian that you give money to your ex-husband who abandoned you and your kids and left you penniless, and you're giving him money, even after all these years, like decades and decades later, because you're a Christian. And that's when my eyes opened. That's when I saw the chariots of fire. And I realized there is more that I have received from God than what I have lost. That Christ, when he was upon the cross, no chariots came for him because he wanted to lay down his life for us. He died for his enemies, people who are anti-God, people who are crucified. He died for those who were crucifying him, knowing that the result is not guaranteed. Matter of fact, when he was up on the cross and when he looked at the crowd, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." He laid down his life so that he would feed them when they are spiritually hungry, and that when they hunger and thirst for righteousness and they don't know how to be righteous. Jesus became flesh and blood, the real bread and real drink for those who lack righteousness, who live in darkness, who cannot forgive and who cannot reconcile, and who is consumed by the darkness. He died for them, and no chariots came to rescue, because that was what God meant for him. God opened my eyes to see that God heaped burning coals upon my head, and I needed to respond to that. I can't just have this great love and forgiveness upon my head and say, you can't just hold still. If you have something burning on top of your head and say, "I'm fine, I don't have any response to that, and I don't know what to do with it. I'm just going to walk gently as I usually do." No, you're going to respond to that. And my response that day was, I saw the burning chariots, and I was finally able to let go and say, "You did what you needed to do. That was you. And God has kept me alive, and God has made me realize how much he has loved me, and not forgiving you and not reconciling with you will go against what he has accomplished on the cross, and that goes against what I have received." So, yes, ultimately in the future, you need to forgive. But for today, here's what I want you to do. I want you to have a great compassion for yourself and just complain to God and just keep telling God why you're so hurt. And secondly, I want you to, when the time comes and you have purged all that, you ask God, will there be a future where I do forgive? If so, God, I want you to open my eyes. Open my eyes to what you have done for me. Open my eyes so that there is chariots of fire where men are bringing their chariots, but you outnumber them. And their evil cannot bring evil into my heart. Make my heart so that your chariots are greater, that I will not be consumed by evil and I live in evil. God, open my eyes. You and I will encounter hostility. You and I can prepare ourselves with arsenal and weapons and make taller, thicker, larger walls. Or we can we can have God open our eyes and receive the bread and wine that gives us righteousness. That is righteousness that is greater than any evil or pain in the world. You can torture them with your words. You can torture your enemies with your words. Or you can torture them with love. Apology and good outcome may never come, guys. Let's just be real about that. And let's not even look for that. I mean, if it does come, great, awesome. Like, we'll take it because it makes it so much easier. But ultimately what we're saying is, I'm going to reconcile, I'm going to forgive you, I'm going to love you Not because you're a good friend, but because you're an enemy, and that's all that is. Because God has opened my eyes and said, your pain and your evil cannot overcome his chariots of fire. My selfhood, my happiness, my joy is not defined by you. It cannot be damaged by you. Yes, you can mess with it. And I do feel sad, and I will struggle with this, but ultimately it cannot be taken from you, taken away by you. It's given to me by God. There is chariots of fire all around me. Therefore, I can even love you. God overcame the humiliation of Christ, which is torture and death upon the cross, but he resurrected him and exalted him. God will do the same with you. God will do the same for all of us. May the Lord open all of our eyes and to know that love and righteousness and peace cannot be taken away because it's God's and he is giving it to us.